All right. So I know we talked about it a little bit before. So those videos are up now. So that's for, was it section 11 and then section 12, which really is me talking about the project. Those are up now. So we kind of talked a little bit about it, but I'm going to review a few things. So I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see what I am seeing. And yes, that's it. Okay, cool. So you guys should be able to see this little Google Doc that I have going on here, which is hopefully good. Okay, good. And I'm just going to go back to Learn real quick. So if you go log into learn.co, right, when you first go to the dashboard, I'll call this the dashboard. That's what we call it internally. If you scroll to the bottom, you should already know this. There's the schedule basically. I'll put the study groups here as I put them out on Learn basically, right? And so you'll see here is that first we have, well, this is confusing because we're at the end of the month, but the 31st right here. So the project should now be live. So if you go down your curriculum, you should now see end of module project. And so you'll be able to click on that. So good, you guys probably have seen this already. Awesome. Just know the project now is officially starts on Monday. But I'm giving you guys kind of the project now that way in case, over the weekend, you're like, oh, I'm all set. I'm done with mod 12. I thought it's going to take me longer. I want to get right into this project. You can check it out now. And then that way, when Monday comes around. So the official start really is on that Monday, June 3rd. And so the way the policy works, you guys, you're all part of this new policy, but from other courts, they had to get rolled into it. But I believe you guys are part of it now. Just know there's some kind of kinks kind of getting worked out exactly the administration side. But basically it comes down that the project is quote unquote due on the 17th of June. And when I say due, it does not mean that it's literally oh, it's due. If you turn in on the 18th, you're completely done. There's no chance for you. It's a soft due date in that sense. Now, when I say that, I kind of go back and forth saying, should I say that? Should I not? Because my goal for you guys is to really be done on the project on the 17th, because on the 17th, we'll start our mod 2. Well, I guess the 18th because our study groups, but that week is when we'll start mod 2 and new sections. And my goal for you guys is not to go through trying to do the project and doing new sections, because it does start off pretty quickly with mathematics and statistics. So that's kind of my goal for you guys. So look out for that. But the reason why this due date also exists, and I really should put it on the calendar if I didn't put it on already, no, is that there's a hard due date according to this new policy, is that once the project is due, which is the 17th, you have a 2-week window to do your assessment. So when I say it's due, you have to turn it in, and I'll kind of show you quickly what that looks like. Oops, that's not it. When we turn it in to the module project here. So, oh, you can't, because I already completed this part. So on the side here, and maybe I'll show you guys a different example, but on the side here, on this right part in Learn, you'll see a thing like this, put in your GitHub repo, your presentation, video link, your blog. That's how you'll submit it. So that's kind of you turning in your material. And if something weird comes up, oh, I submitted the wrong thing, just let me know, and I can probably fix it on the back end. But this is how you'll submit it, and this is how I know, oh, you're all set, ready to go. If you don't turn it in time, hopefully, we're still talking, but back and forth, so I know where you're in progress of it. But if I don't see this turned in by the 17th, I'll definitely reach out and say, hey, what's up? Is everything okay? Do we need more time and all that stuff? But just know that you have, from the June 17th part, hopefully you turn it in that day or before that, okay? If you don't quite, we should talk, make sure that we can get you going so you don't have to worry about the mod 2 section. But after that point is that June 17th week, so the 17th through the 21st, we'll do project assessments. So what that means is basically you turn in your project, which means your blog, your GitHub repo with your Jupyter notebook. Hopefully your GitHub repo also contains your PDF of the presentation, and then as well as a video recording of your presentation for the non-technical piece. And I'll go talk about what those are in a second, but you'll turn all of those in there. And your project assessment then will basically be an extended one-on-one. So instead of 30 minutes, it's going to be a 45-minute session where basically we go through the non-technical presentation. So you basically kind of do your presentation with me, or most likely me. It might be another instructor. But basically you do your presentation as if you're presenting to a non-technical person. And then you'll go through the technical piece, which is basically your Jupyter notebook. So it's not a presentation. It's much more like a conversation. where like, the person, in this case, let's say it's me, going back and forth, asking you some questions about data science, say, why did you do it this way? Like, is there advantages of doing it this way versus another way? And things like that. Or did you find anything interesting, or like, what was your results, kind of deal. So that's kind of like the two things you'll have. And that's really your assessment. Just know that that's kind of like the main like thing that will probably stick out in your mind the most. But note that also your blog will be due. And the blog, I'll talk about in a second. The blog is associated with the project where you focus on one specific thing about something you did in the project. It could be about linear regression. It could be about how you did your EDA, maybe something specifically about like, I don't know, feature extraction or something along those lines. Basically, you pick one element from there. So that's kind of like the overall, like what things are due. And so that first week is going to be our project assessment. And so that's why like this is going to be due on the 17th. So that way we'll set up a one-on-one. Our one-on-one instead will be our, what's it called? Our project assessment time. And if, let's say, you don't pass through the requirements, for example, and you can be reassessed again. And let's say, for example, or if you didn't quite finish it in time here, we have an extra week, which follows into, oh, here it is, the 24th through the 28th. We'll have one more week to do our project assessments. But after that week, the 2-week hard deadline comes in for the policy and basically says that you have to move on to another cohort in the past. And I'm not there to scare you or anything like that. It's just more like, the reason why we have this in place, to be honest, is that sometimes we've had in the past where someone's like been in the cohort for a long time and maybe they missed the project date and they have now module 2 project coming, or module 2 going through. They're scrambling for getting module 2 in project 1 and trying to, then we even have people who are doing 2 projects at the same time. And what ends up happening, it just ends up being, 1, really stressful for the student, and 2 is that you don't do your best work, and at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if we check off the box to say you have your project assessed, and you passed. It's about you being able to present your project and say, hey, future employer, check out what I've done. So that's kind of like some of the motivation behind that too. So just kind of be aware. And hopefully my biggest thing, and I'm going to say this in general and not saying like anyone will particularly fall into this spot, but a classic thing that people tend to do is when they start falling behind in their project week, you get the next couple of weeks, and they start falling behind, they'll kind of ghost and they'll kind of like not really reach out. Don't do that. As much as like how easy it is to kind of like retreat back and say, oh no, I'm not reaching, I'm not getting where I'm supposed to or where I want to be, reach out and let me know, right? And say like, hey, I'm not where I'm supposed to, what can I do? Because then I can help you out, or we can see what we can do. That way we don't wait until like, literally like, during the project assessment and find out, oh, like there's a whole bunch we have to talk about and you haven't gone through and you could have used help way before. So my big thing, reach out, even if it's, even if you feel like, it's like, oh, Victor's gonna be super disappointed in me or something like that. I don't know what they're saying, but just know that I won't judge. Like, I'm here to help. Okay, cool. So any questions about like the timeline and how it's structured out? Okay, cool. So just plan to have your project done to be turned in on Learn on June 17th or by June 17th. And then we'll have our project assessment during this time, okay, that 17th through the 21st. And then there's just one extra week in case, something comes up. And if anything comes up too, like personal stuff that comes up in life, let me know as soon as it happens, just so that way we can figure out what to do next. Okay, cool. So that's kind of like the logistics of like how the project is like timed out. So I'm gonna show you guys, where is it? Okay, I'm gonna show you guys the repo. So if you go into Learn, right, and you go to the final mod project, it basically will show you this guy right here. And this right here is basically describing the requirements for the project. And it gives you a rundown. I'll let you guys read this through if you haven't already read it through already. But just know, basically, we're going to give you a data set. And that data set is going to be the King County house sales. Basically, this data set involves like features of the house and says your target is basically how much the house costs, right? And in this repo itself, make sure you go through this repo. One thing, for example, that people really forget, they'll get the data set, which is the CSV file right here, but they won't look at the column names, which tells you what are the columns in that CSV. It tells you what these things are. Like, that's a key part. And I think a lot of people forget that this exists. So make sure if you, make sure you know how to get to this part. But basically this is your GitHub that you kind of are, the repo that you'll be referencing. Okay. So you have a data set. And your job basically is to do the data science life cycle process, right? And so you can think of like Awesome, for example, or you could think of like CRISP-DM, but I usually use the Awesome methodology. Just that's my preference, but you don't have to like essentially go into full, anyway, you have a few processes that you can do. And so the main thing is though, you won't be doing data acquisition. So you won't be getting new data. You don't have to go to a SQL server. You don't have to scrape any data. We give you all the data that you should need. Okay. If you really want to, and you have more time, you possibly can supplement this stuff, but really focus on that main data set. Okay. And with that stuff, you're basically going to go through it. You're going to clean it, scrub it, find what things are missing, find what things that don't look quite right. Do exploration. So that means like basically trying to see like what things, basically like your distributions should be a really quick exploration. How many missing values you have. Are there values that don't seem quite right? Like, you know, how many unique values you have? Should they be category? Should they be integer? Are they actually the right type? You know, sometimes you'll have like strings where there should be numbers, and pandas will treat that whole data frame or that whole column of the data frame as a string or object type. So look out for those kind of things. Okay, so that's your main part, and that's what your Jupyter Notebook will basically doing that whole process of going through through cleaning, exploration, and then eventually feature selection, so figuring out which features, which columns make sense. You might make new features, for example, with like one-hot encoding for your categories and stuff like that. So those would be like your feature extraction, or not feature extraction, feature selection, feature creation, right? And once you have those parts, then you'll lead into your linear regression. And your linear regression, normally we talk about like modeling or prediction modeling. In this case, we're only going to be using linear regression, multiple linear regression, multiple features, right? In other ways, we could do more things. But of course, in this project, that's the only predictive model that we've taught you so far. So just kind of know that's what you'll be doing. And that should be a pretty decent amount of sense, like, you know, not just implementing it, because I think for the most part, you can probably implement it pretty much seeing what the curriculum does. But the important part is to understand, what does it mean when you do this linear regression? Like, was it a good model? Are there ways you can improve it? You know, what features did you use? What are the values of those features? You know, like now that you have something that predicts, you know, these prices, say like, okay, what kind of information can I extract from this model? For example, what are the coefficients? How do the coefficients relate to what you'll present to a business stakeholder? You know, like, do these matter at all? And of course, you wouldn't just simply, for most people, you wouldn't just give them the equation and say, here's the equation for the regression line. You would have to say, well, what's important and what you found as a data scientist. And that's a big part of data science, is the communication aspect, okay? And that's what leads directly into one aspect, your presentation, okay? And so I'm gonna show you, I put a little checklist here. So read through this part, has a lot of information. If there's some questions on it, let me know, but I'm gonna kind of basically summarize it with this little checklist here, okay? So these are the requirements. And so these are the requirements right here. There's 4, Jupyter Notebook, your PDF presentation, then you'll do a recording of your video, and it's meant to be, don't stress out about trying to like make sure it's all nice and perfect. Really the video, and to be quite honest, I'm not gonna grade you on the recording. It basically is meant for you to show that you know how to do the presentation. It gives you another extra practice, and that's something for us to say, hey, look, they did their presentation besides just us talking with you, okay? So that's kind of like what this is. So don't stress out about this. But your presentation should be about 5 minutes, okay? So that's how long your video should be. It shouldn't be like a 30-minute video or a 10-minute video even. It should be about 5 minutes. Also, don't make it like a 2-minute video. Like, that's way too short, right? That's like, don't try to go Speedy Gonzalez going really quickly saying everything, okay? And then your blog post. In your blog post, I'll explain a little bit further down. Your blog post, you're gonna focus on one specific aspect, and this is part of your project. So you can't pass through the project unless you have all 4 of these pieces, okay? But your blog post, you'll focus on one specific aspect of your project. A lot of people, like, for example, will focus on talking about what linear regression is, what multiple linear regression is. They might talk about feature extraction. They might talk about like the original exploratory data analysis, basically like what things they saw were interesting, how did they do this? So a mix of code, a mix of like explanation, some visuals would be nice, okay? And there's a couple ways you can do this blog post. One I personally like is using medium.com. Because a lot of data scientists and a lot of technical people will put their articles on there. And I think it's a good place to put it, especially if you're trying to build basically your online presence, which is really what the reasons for this blog is, to basically show that you can communicate to technical technical aspects, right? So that's really what we're trying to focus on here. Okay, so on at the actual assessment, okay. So this is when our little extended one-on-one, it's about 45 minutes in total. Okay, that's how much we'll schedule it for. We'll start off with our non-technical presentation. So what you'll do, you and me, or whoever the instructor is, will share, you'll share your screen, and basically you'll share your your PDF presentation or your PowerPoint presentation or whatever it is, and you'll basically walk through the presentation as if you're presenting it to a bunch of stakeholders. Okay, and so this again should be only about 5 minutes for the presentation. Okay, and then there'll be about 5 minutes afterwards where I'll ask questions as a non-technical person. So someone who's in that role of being an investor or something like that. So when I say stakeholders, you can decide how you want to think of this. And if you want to say, oh, I'm presenting it to, before the thing, for assessment, you can say, oh, I'm presenting it to a set of people that are like this, then I'll keep that in mind. But you can think of someone who's looking to flip houses. You can think of someone who's doing real estate investments, maybe someone who has a bunch of real estate and wants to see what things should they sell? Are there ways they should hold it? Or, other things, whatever kind of stuff you find are important. That's kind of who you're talking to. So some stakeholders who are non-technical, who don't know data science, The way I kind of think of this is, think of this person having maybe mid-level of high school math. So they shouldn't be super technical. They should understand what multiplication is, they understand how to do that. They probably understand what a line is and that kind of relationship, but they're not gonna know what regression is. They're not gonna know what correlation is, or an R, they might know R squared, but you can say briefly an R squared value, which, and you can quickly summarize what an R squared value is, but not going into full details. You're not teaching that. You're just basically summarizing a bunch of information, okay? So a couple things I want to emphasize for your presentation, because we haven't really talked about presentations, and depending on your experience, you might have done a lot of presentations, for work, maybe even in school in some capacity. But some of you guys might not have, or it's been a long time, right? So one thing I want to say is use less words. I actually like to use sentence fragments, because if I use sentence fragments, it means that I can't force myself to make a whole paragraph. If I have to say, oh, it has to be a sentence fragment, then I'm less likely to be really wordy. Okay, and that's kind of what I'm trying to get at, is that use basically information that emphasizes your point, not explains your point. You're explaining your point, okay? So again, emphasizing your points, and you can emphasize it with short phrases like those sentence fragments and stuff like that. You don't need very many words to actually emphasize saying what you're trying to talk about, okay? And then you can emphasize it with visuals. So this visuals, I'll kind of talk about in a second, but there's some caveats I want to make sure I explain. But one thing that's really useful to use that I like to say, this is great for linear regression especially, because the way it's written, is you can say something along oh, for every 100 square feet, based on our model, we expect that by increasing the house's square feet by 100, will increase the housing price by $1,000, or whatever your values end up being. This is really common kind of speak in a business setting. So, and it's really nice because it's a very straightforward, oh, if I increase the house by 100 square feet, I will get $1,000 more dollars. That's really what's it called? Really tangible for a lot of people. So I would say using this kind of phrasing and make things that matter. For example, if you say something increase, 1.5 windows will give us, $10.3, kind of thing. That's a little confusing. Wait, what exactly does that mean? So make sure you make it phrase that someone can easily understand what you're talking about, okay? One thing you shouldn't do is don't give out a whole equation. I've done this. I've personally done this, and I regretted it immediately because I get really excited, oh, look at this cool equation, and people go, what? I have no clue what you're trying to say. And then they'll never let go of that afterwards. So keep it simple, basically. This should be the most math, I think, that you should actually show, okay? Or something along these lines, okay? And now visuals kind of go along this way, because visuals are really tempting, and you're all data scientists in training, basically, or you're essentially data scientists now. That's what you're doing, right? And we all love our charts. We love our visualizations. We're oh, look at this amazing chart. Look how awesome this is. Be careful of that, because you don't want to make it complicated. You don't want to make it overwhelming. I call it chart junk. Don't have a bunch of stuff in your visualizations that basically distract from the main point. So for example, if you have a scatter plot, either get rid of points or show the central points. One thing you can do is adjust the alpha for your plots. and it'll show more of a general kind of trend if that's what you feel is important. If you just really want to say, hey, look, there's a positive correlation or a negative correlation, you can basically draw a line through your points, like similar to like what a regression line looks like. And that can emphasizing your point of saying, oh, as you increase or decrease, they can get the idea. So a few points, bar charts. If you have a visualization that has, I'm gonna say 50 different bars, that's not really gonna be helpful. Like if there's some reason why you want to show like a huge spread of like different variables, like let's say 50 different bars, pick like 5 of them and say like, oh, here's like 2 from the very tallest, 2 in the middle, and like 2 at the end. Or you want to pick the very the most frequent one, like the top 5. You can do something like that. I would really say more than 5 bars is like the maximum, in my opinion. You might disagree. You might say that there's something important there. That's up to you, right? But I would say keeping it as small as possible. 5 usually ends up being a nice kind of number that's not too intimidating and everything. But yeah, I'd say scatter plots, be careful with those because people love putting scatter plots and we love looking at it like, oh, look at all the distribution and stuff like this. You can also put really fancy plots. Like there's some things like violin plots, if you haven't seen, which are pretty awesome. Like the way they kind of show like distribution, stuff like that. They might not be the best setting for this kind of stuff unless you knew ahead of time they were analytical. They have an analytics background. Just because they might be like, they're looking at the plot and like, I don't understand what I'm supposed to be seeing. And that's the point. You want to make sure that it's understandable. Okay. All right. So a couple other things. Each slide has its own idea. None of size is more than enough. If you have 2 ideas on one slide, it should be 2 slides at the very minimum. Okay. The reason why is because you'll start talking about the one concept while everyone is looking at the other concept, right? So you want to split that up so to make it more digestible. You can have multiple slides for one idea as long as you're not going through it very quickly, passing information that if you show something, they should be able to understand it. And if it's too complicated, like if you ever have this in the real world, if someone says, no, can you go back? It means you put too much information on there. And you need to split it up, simplify it, or spend more time on that specific slide. Okay, so main thing though, each slide has its own idea. And then last few things, which talks about in the actual curriculum repo, recommendations. Say, what do you recommend? Something like this. Okay, so what do you recommend to the business stakeholders? Why should they listen to you? Why do they care? Okay, they don't really, I mean, in the end, it's great that you're doing a project, but in the end, it's kind of like, why does this matter to us? And that's the important part. Okay, and then always mention, this is true for any project, mention things that you could improve. For example, it's like, oh, you know what, like we would have loved to look at other, I don't know, more data from different, areas. This is something that we could look in future work. You can say something, we would like to use more advanced models, in the future, saying like what things improvement, or things that you saw that like, oh, we could have improved on this, or we could have used this, but we didn't have enough information or enough time or whatever. This is the time to talk about future work. Okay. And then always make sure you just thank them. That's kind of like, that's one of those things where it's like, it's not a necessity, but I think it's something that's important that you really should thank, for their time and everything like that. And it's just considered common courtesy. And sometimes, to be honest, I've forgotten, I don't usually think about this every time. And someone mentions that, I'm like, should probably put that in there. So, okay, cool. So that's your non-technical presentation. And this is all within 5 minutes, like pretty quick. So you're not saying a whole lot, you're not summarizing your whole project. You're really saying, what are the really interesting aspects that they should care about? Okay. Cool. Any questions about this non-tech piece? All right, cool. Okay. All right, so the last one, or not the last one, but the next one is like your technical piece, which you're gonna spend about 30 minutes walking through. And the way you should think about this is, it's your technical piece really is your Jupyter notebook, which hopefully should feel pretty comfortable. Like you shouldn't have to be like, oh no, like I can't, what's it called? Like I can't explain this part or whatever. Like basically everything you have in your Jupyter notebook, you should be able to explain if someone scrolls and says, what's going on here? You might say, oh, let me look at it. Oh, okay, I was doing this thing. You should at least be able to do that. But you shouldn't be like, I don't know what I was doing there. That's a bad sign. It means that, one, that maybe you shouldn't be doing it, or 2, maybe you need some more info on there to help remind yourself what's going on, okay? But this is much more of a conversation. So you can think of it like you're having a conversation like with another data scientist, like someone else on your data team, or possibly like a data manager. So maybe someone like your boss or something like that who's saying, okay, like, can you explain this for me? You should assume that they understand basic data science concepts. They understand what a distribution is. They understand, you know, what a linear regression is. They understand those parts. They understand like cleaning data, but they might not know specifically about this data set. This might be the first time they're ever looking at this data set in particular, okay? And really what you want to convey is like the reason why you're talking to them is they want to know like what you did, what interesting things you found, and like questions that I tend to ask are like, oh, why did you do this part? Or, oh, does this make sense? Or I'll kind of like do a little like, what's it called? Like say, like, would it matter if we changed it? You know, like, or what do you, like, what have you seen kind of deal? I usually say like, was there anything interesting to you? And you just tell me about it, you know, and we might skip around back and forth. We might not necessarily go top down. We might say, oh, well, show me what you did right here. He's like, oh, it's like, I thought I ended up doing this way, but later on, I actually ended up dropping it for this reason for distributions. Like, oh yeah, let's check that out. And we'll scroll down, go to there, check that out, you know, might go back and forth, okay? When you're doing your Jupyter notebook, focus on readability. So, and the way I see this is that you can imagine giving your Jupyter notebook to another data scientist and they should be able to understand it. They should be able to read it from the top down and understand not just the code, but also why are you doing the code, right? And so what I say is that it should be like markdown. So you have your markdown parts to explain what you're doing in the code. So like you have your code here and you might either like find something interesting, like maybe you see something in the plot, you write something underneath there. You might talk about right before, it's like, okay, you know, we're gonna go ahead and explore in this way because these things are really interesting, or we think that these things would be have a huge effect, or something along that line. You write like, you know, maybe 2 sentences kind of thing. It doesn't have to be super long, but basically enough to explain a little bit, say why you're doing this next part. So that's why I say markdown is to explain why you're doing this, what you noticed, interesting things, and maybe say that, oh, we'll come back to this later or something along those lines. Because you'll edit this, you'll kind of edit it, move things around, but in the end, you'll be able to logically read it through, okay? And then,
sorry,
yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask a quick question? To what degree we need to explain? Like, do we need to point out like very basic things, like we're reading the file, or we don't need to go to that level of?
No, yeah, and I'll show you an example a little bit with a different project. But the main thing is that you should understand what you're doing. And then, so when you're scrolling through it, you say, oh yeah, I was doing this. Oh, I cleaned this. Oh, I found this distribution. I thought this was really interesting, you know, and then I might say, well, what was interesting about it? It's like, well, okay, I saw it was skewed in this way, which made me do these kind of things. Like that's how the familiarity you should have. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be like, oh, I know exactly what the numbers are. You know, you just got to give a quick overview. Okay. Yeah, so cool. So markdown, and you should think your markdown is kind of like explanation where someone can quickly read that through and understand your thought process that you'll verbally talk about, okay? And let's see here, comments in your code. Think of your comments. So people ask me like, do I use markdown or do I use comments? And the big thing I would say, comments are there to explain your code of what your code is doing, not why your code is doing the things. Your markdown is there to explain why you're doing the things that you're doing, or the things that you noticed from your code or plots or whatever. So the important part is like comments are basically there to kind of explain, you know, what the code is doing. Okay, cool. Trying to think if there's anything big. So I've said this last time, I'm gonna repeat it again. When you're making your Jupyter notebook and you're working on it, I say about like literally set a timer like every 30 minutes as you're working or something like that. But 30 minutes to every hour, stop the notebook, stop the kernel, reset the kernel, and run it from top down to make sure it runs properly. And the reason why is because sometimes you might run multiple like rips, or you might run the cell over and over again, which might have some side effects that you didn't realize. So you like end up getting to this whole thing, you work for like 3 hours straight, you're like, awesome, I get all this stuff, and you try running it for the first time again by doing a kernel restart, and you're like, oh shoot, it didn't work. Like what's going on? And so to prevent those kind of things, stopping every like 30 minutes to maybe an hour, to basically make sure that it's working properly. That's just a good check. Like you might do that naturally, but making sure you do it every 30 minutes or an hour could be helpful. And then what I do is I'll rearrange my stuff. So for example, you might do the cleaning and then do exploration and then realize like, oh wait, like I should have cleaned this part to do certain things or whatever. And then say, okay, let me go back to the cleaning aspect and re-clean this part and do that part. So even though I actually didn't go from top down doing all the cleaning, all of the exploration, I'll tend to organize everything in that way, if that makes sense. Because you might do your linear regression line and find like, oh wait, that didn't work at all. Like there's a complete error or something weird like that. and like, oh, I made a mistake. I'll go back and fix that and then rearrange that. And I'll do that like about every like hour, you know, just to kind of rearrange and make sure everything's working out smooth. Otherwise, you get to the end of your notebook, you're like, oh, good, I'm done. I got this amazing model. And then you look at your notebook and you're like, oh my gosh, this is such garbage. I can't read any of this. What's going on? So that's why it can help you organize that part. Okay, cool. So any questions on technical? And I'll show you a little bit like what that might look like.
Yeah, I have a question. So the technical like walkthrough presentation is done live in an assessment with you, right? We're not recording ourselves.
No, that's right. Yeah, don't record this. This will take you forever.
Cool.
The only part you're recording is this little 5-minute presentation, simple presentation. Technical.
With the presentation that we are recording for the non-technical stakeholders, are we supposed to have like our presentation visible, or just like record ourselves on a blank background and assume that they can follow along in like the PDF?
No, yeah, record the PDF, like you going through the PDF. If you had to choose between like showing your face and showing like your PDF, like you're walking through, show the PDF. Like, like got it. No offense, you know, like no one really wants to stare at someone's face just like talking about the things like as you can see.
Actually, now I feel silly even asking that. That makes
that's
much
right.
sense. Yeah.
No, someone asked the same things like, do I have to be in there? Like, do I have to dress up? I'm like, you don't have to be. You can talk right over it. It doesn't matter.
That's awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, cool. Any other questions you guys have? I know it's a lot of information coming in, so. All right, cool. And so the last part then I'm going to mention before I kind of show you a couple examples is your blog post. Your blog post, I think it's 800 words. Yeah, 800 to 1500 words. So nothing super long. Okay, it shouldn't be super short, but you know, decent size. Really focus on one aspect of your project. So one methodology, one part. You can talk about something interesting you found and how you approach that. That's fine. A lot of people like to talk about, excuse me, for their projects like an EDA, saying like, oh, what they did their initial exploratory, say, oh, like this was interesting and I found this and this is how I proceeded. You can talk about that on your blog. One thing that I tend to gravitate towards when I kind of like do things like this is I might focus on like explaining an aspect and say, oh, this is how you do linear regression. You can do that too. Just say, like, oh, this is how you do this process. That's fine. You don't have to be an expert. Don't stress out about being like, oh, like I don't know everything about linear regression. Am I sure I'm going to mess up? Like you might make a mistake, or you might say something that's not quite exactly right, but that's okay. You know, you're learning in this part. But the important part is it's practice. It really is practice and showing that you can communicate. That's kind of what you're showing when you're doing a blog post. You're showing how you can communicate technical aspects to other people. And as you get, you know, more advanced into your career, you'll do this more and more and more. And being able to do this kind of thing is really useful. And what's nice, it gives you an online presence, which actually can help you out. Say, hey, when someone goes searches your name, they can find the things that you've made and says, whoa, this person's actually active in doing things, you know? So that's always a good thing, right? It's great to put in like visuals, for example, like if you have a plot or like, you know, if you find a visual online, if you do use a visual, make sure you like credit, like if it's not something that you didn't make, but then explain that. You say, oh, you know, like, oh, I have this graph here, and you might talk about it within like a paragraph. And that's like already like a paragraph is a pretty decent amount of like the 800 words. So note that like, it doesn't have to be super long. You don't have to be an amazing writer. I'm not an amazing writer. Not that I'm saying that you should follow my practices, but like the point is that you don't have to make it perfect. Okay. One of our instructors, Eli, he has like all these catchphrases that I love just like quoting him on. And he says like, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Is that right? Yeah, I think that's what he says. Yeah. All right, cool. And it's completely true. It's like, don't think that you have to be perfect, which stops you from doing everything else. Like, don't be a deer in headlights. Like, do what you can, you know, and you can work from there. And what's nice is the data science community is pretty supportive. There's people are usually like very happy to see people coming in and trying, you know, and explaining things and stuff like that. So yeah, cool. Any general questions about this before I kind of show you guys a couple examples of an idea of how to approach this? Cool. All right. So, oh, one thing I did want to mention is that on Learn here, there's a project rubric. So on the bottom of the dashboard right here, you can see out here also the feedback survey and everything like that. But the project rubric, I just put that on here. And there's a little rubric that I'll use, that I'll fill out for you guys. This is relatively new, so it's kind of exciting that you do this. But it shows you basically the things that we're looking for. Basically everything I kind of described. If you have questions on this, definitely ask about it. Okay, it says fit models hypothesis testing. It really should just be fits models because in this project, we're not doing hypothesis testing. You really should just be doing a model fit, okay? But just kind of go through this and you can see a little bit and kind of, I would say like double check yourself, like self-assess and say, all right, am I finishing everything in this column here? And you'll notice that there's some like X factor here too. So like you're thinking like, what things can you do? Like, you know, I want to make this not impressive just for Victor to like really be proud of me and everything like that, but also like make it like cool on your like your portfolio project. These are things that you could do to kind of like add to it. And know that you can always come back to your project afterwards. Like you pass your project, you're like, cool, but I want to do more on it. You can always go back to it and adjust and change and everything like that. Okay, cool. All right, so this is here. And I wanted to show you, okay, so I'm gonna show you kind of an example project that is not housing prices, obviously, right? This is a project I had done that's kind of similar to like what you guys are doing. So like in the sense of like how it's structured. Note that I don't have code in here. It's actually written in R, not Python. So you won't be able to understand the code anyway, probably, so don't worry about it. But I kind of want to show you like how it's structured where I have like an explanation talking about like, here's a readout of some information. You can get like .info or .describe. And I'll have like an explanation underneath here. I'll have a couple like visualizations in this case. And know that this is a little more intense than you guys necessarily need to do. But just kind of know this kind of like this general structure is that you have like kind of some couple sentences maybe explaining what's going on here, or, you know, leading and say, oh, this looks really interesting. I have this like weird peak over here. Let me go observe it in this way. All right, seeing some interesting factors and stuff like that. And you can kind of see is that, again, this is more writing than you guys will do. But I wanted to mostly show off that like, oh, you have a graph or some visualization and you might talk about it a little bit or lead into the next part. So this is not a really exciting visualization too. Like I didn't like using colors, but you can start getting into other parts. Say, oh, okay, like this is interesting, and say, okay, and you can see here, kind of talking about it. You don't need to write as much as this. Like I'm thinking like maybe half of like this paragraph right here is the longest you probably would ever write. I think most of your paragraphs will look closer to like about this amount, basically explaining, because your code's partly explaining stuff for you too. Okay, but I wanted to show you guys an example like what this would look like as you're kind of going through. Obviously there would be code in it too. So this is not like a perfect example, but get an idea where it's broken up between like, you know, here's a graph, talk about it, say, oh, that's really interesting. Let's look into something else. And then I'll show another graph or another visualization or another part of the code. Okay, cool. All right, any questions in general about the technical piece then? Awesome. I forgot how long this thing is. Oh, geez. Okay. You guys think I can talk a lot, can write a lot too. All right, let's see here. So one thing, I guess, I was gonna show you guys this, but I feel like this might actually be, this is from a presentation that was from, what's her name? Rachel, oops, that's not it. There was a symposium for data science and here she is. She's awesome, by the way. She does a lot of like, works at Kaggle, and she has a lot of like walkthroughs and stuff like that, like almost like weekly. So it's pretty cool. But I just want to show you like what this is a professional data scientist at a symposium with a lot of information. And you can see, you don't see huge paragraphs. These are bullet points, fragments. You can see those titles and everything like that. The visualization, right? You can see like she talked about these things instead of like actually like, you know, going through like, you know, some of this is actually probably more information that you probably wouldn't necessarily have. But note that, you know, like it's not a huge amount of like writing, okay? Like this right here is probably more than what you guys will do, but this is a different kind of setting. This is an academic setting versus a business kind of setting. But I just wanted to show you an example kind of like what this might look like. Okay, cool. All right, so I think that's the same thing. I think that's all I really wanted to share with you guys. Did you guys have any questions or anything that you guys wanted to ask or bring up?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, so that Module 1 project Google Doc you were going through with us, is that available in the student resources?
I don't think it's in student resources, but I put it on the Learn dashboard right here.
Okay. Oh,
so you should be able to find
the rubric, though, right?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, I didn't mean the rubric, though, the Google Doc that you were going through with us about the technical.
Oh, this one here? Yeah, I'll put this as one of the resources. I'll Slack it out too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just copy this now.
Cool, thanks.
No problem. Cool. All right, so I'm going to stop recording unless you guys have any other questions.